Welcome to the Life Tracks Podcast. I'm your host, Marvin Bryson. For me, podcasting represents a modern take on oral storytelling traditions. Being born in the very last year of the baby boom, I'm closing in on retirement and have grown comfortable in embracing my role of elder in hopes that future generations might benefit from my experiences. An extra added bonus is that part of my history will also be available for my grandchildren should they want to know more about their pop-pop. As a teen, I landed my first paying gig as a musician. The year was 1979, so I have more than 40 years of stories to share in that venue. My music business background came into play because it informed my first motion picture gig as a music supervisor in 2001. The film was Blue Moon, the late great director Xavier Green's Howard University Fine Arts thesis project. Blue Moon aired on Showtime and marked the debut of notable comedic actress Coco Brown. From there, I focused on motion picture editing, completed a great Avid editing program, and moved to Hollywood. Over the past 20 years, I have compiled over 200 credits on roughly 20 television series and films. So without further ado, let's get into track 4, Liminal. The word liminal, or the liminal space, has come to be one of my favorite expressions now that I'm in a place where I can look back on 58 years of living. A liminal space is that space between spaces. When you're in a liminal space, you're neither here nor there. It's a place of transition, waiting, and not knowing. I lived in a liminal space for most of my early 20s, but didn't have a word or phrase to describe it. And moreover, helped me understand that it's a space where many creative people find themselves as they transition from one venue to another. My college football career was successful, but short-lived. I played a lot as a freshman on special teams, starting 5 or 6 games when we ran a 34 defense, and subbing in for our middle linebacker from time to time, with one full game where he went down with an injury. That game was against Trenton State University, probably the best game of my football career. My scholarship was to the University of the District of Columbia. UDC's main campus remains located in one of the nicer neighborhoods of Northwest Washington. The football team and the 1981 Men's Division II National Championship basketball team shared locker room facilities adjacent to the eclectic U Street corridor at 16th and Q Streets in Northwest. Our practice facilities were across the street from Georgetown University Hospital and belonged to the Duke Ellington School of the Arts, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going into this because UDC is a commuter school and my commute was extensive. I owned a car, but parked it at our locker room facility and hopped on the subway to get back and forth to campus. There was also the daily shuttle bus ride from our locker room on 16th Street to Georgetown, then roughly a 1-hour commute home. During one of those commutes, a song, Can I Love You, came over the radio. When the DJ said that it was a new release from a local band, Rumors, it took me about 10 seconds to realize that Tony, Marcus, and Terrence were going by the name Rumors, and that was them on the radio. Suffice it to say, I completed my ride home with a big smile on my face, but also learned the lesson that every time we choose something, we are excluded from something else. By the time winter break rolled around, I was exhausted and broke. I quickly landed a holiday job in retail at the Andrews Air Force Base Main Exchange and continued working there part-time. Not being serious about my education, the next 4 years or so were a blur of dropping in and out of college, visiting a few schools that were interested in me as an athlete, and partying way too hard at the HBCUs up and down the East Coast and clubs. I managed to stay in school long enough to land an internship at Blue Cross Blue Shield that turned into a full-time opportunity for me. Before I knew it, I was a full-blown adult with responsibilities and, more importantly, debt. During those blurry years, I would link up with an old friend Al to jam. Al played drums, guitar, and was a hell of a songwriter. My focus had turned to bass guitar at that point, so Al and I started to write songs together, songs in which I also wrote many of the keyboard parts. Over time, the allure of being a full-time musician took hold. So I made some financial and lifestyle changes and started working part-time to free me up to write. I began to supplement my lost income by DJing weddings, small parties, and a bunch of pool parties and cookouts. DJing was a type of performing, but not like the celebrity DJs that started popping up in the 90s. Around 1985, I crossed paths again with my neighbor Ant from Hot Property. He turned me on to MIDI technology by showing me his home project studio. He fired up his MIDI system and started banging out the bass line of Cameo's hit Candy, then showed me how he layered the other tracks while producing the song. For folks that play multiple instruments like us, it was a game changer. I didn't go full-blown MIDI at that point, but did set myself up with a 4-track portable studio where I could create 9 or 10 track demos. My rig consisted of a Tascam Porta 1 recorder, an Alesis Microverb for effects, a Roland TR-505 drum machine, and a Korg Poly 800 synth. With those tools along with my bass and lead guitars, I started producing the songs Al and I sketched out, along with other tracks for friends. While being able to compose your own material is a blast, I missed that creativity that came from the energy passed when group mates collaborate. So Al and I got together with his cousin Greg on bass and my brother on drums to see how our work translated live. There's nothing worse than going to a show where the band sounds nothing like the record. It's a pet peeve of mine. Over the course of the next year, we picked up a couple more bandmates and composed enough material for our album. Our expanded lineup consisted of bass, drums, percussion, 2 keyboardists, and a guitar. Al and Greg had nice voices and handled most of the singing. Over time, we got tighter and added 2 more vocalists for a studio run. I went back to work full-time to help finance it, and after a few months, we had picked a couple of our best songs for a demo tape. During this time, I was in contact with Marcus and Leon, who had both moved to LA. Marcus was working for the federal government, but also gigging a lot. Leon was working full-time at a record label and in a band with his production partner Terry, that was also from the neighborhood. We all swapped war stories and encouraged each other. The band Al and I put together settled on the name 495 in homage to the Capitol Beltway. We found a studio and booked our time. It was nice to work in a professional studio. We recorded 2 songs, 1 up-tempo, 1 ballad. I played keyboard on both, bass on the ballad, and sang backup on the ballad. The owner of the studio was impressed with us and let us know he owned his own record label that he wanted to sign us to. During negotiations, he intimated that we would be financing our own album and videos. I didn't see the value in being on a label per se, where we had to pay. This didn't make sense to me, and moreover, made me suspect of the so-called label owner. Much like my earlier experience with my guys, Marcus, Tony, and Terrence, I agreed to walk away without a fuss, giving 495 free reign to do what they wanted to do with the songs we wrote together. So I returned to my project studio to work on new tunes. Time would just fly by, and oftentimes I would find myself staying up to 3 or 4 a.m. After a couple of months of that, I thought to myself, bite the bullet, dude, move to LA. I spoke to Marcus and Leon about the move, and they encouraged it. So I reached out to my only family in LA, a cousin that offered me a couch. Being the planner that I am, I had everything arranged a month or so before my planned departure date. I made the mistake of giving my boss 1 month's notice instead of the customary 2 weeks. Suffice it to say, those last 2 weeks were tenuous, and I was given permission to leave if I'd like. I needed the extra cash and therefore decided to stay on. At that moment, I came to realize, unless you are an executive or considered key staff, never give more than 2 weeks' notice. So despite the skepticism of family, friends, and coworkers, I packed my project studio and some clothes into a steamer trunk, packed a smaller second bag, and my bass. It was 1990, so I also had this newfangled computer called a laptop. The laptop was one of those IBM models with two of those 3.5 floppy disks and a built-in printer. A friend of mine, Steve, had printed his first book, and he had a couple of computers, so he sent me off in style. I remember landing in LAX excited, but also, like an explorer in uncharted territories, no clear plan.